Testing, testing, testing. What's this? What? Got 3 online right now. Well, actually 2.
Something gone off?
What did I know of? Okay, here comes one more. Someone trying to get in. Find it. There we go. Get more. There we go. 3 online. Made a goof here. Overview.
All right, my camera isn't working. I'm going to restart my computer really quick.
26. Make a goof on the schedule. Next one. Okay, we'll get her started here. We're going for tonight. We've got 4 handouts. First one being the modified schedule. Second handout being the PowerPoints. And the third is information on the research paper for next week. And then the last one is the information on the project. And we'll talk about those last two at the end of the material. Talk about this modification to the schedule. Also out here in the week 8 material. Right now this is being goofy. That's actually exactly what I had open. I'll just close one of these. So of course we've already been through the first page. We're up here to the midterm exam. There's just some corrections to the dates of the number phobic presentations and the corrections as to assignments. What was due when? I modified some in terms of the topic of the paper or the topic of the project, and shuffled a few dates around in terms of due dates. So what we'll have for next time is going to be the mini research paper about credit scores, and then there's a project on economic order quantity calculation. It gets us to our week 8. This is chapter 12, which is on inventory. Bulk of the material here is on economic order quantity, which is the second section. That's also the basis of the project for due next week. So we get into some basics right at the beginning of the chapter, mentioning what is inventory. It's items available for sale or with the intention of being available for sale. If your company is a manufacturing business, see inventory split into 3 different categories based on level of completion. If the company is a merchandising company that just buys and sells goods, it's going to have the finished goods and be labeled as merchandise inventory and have just one inventory account on the balance sheet. So for our manufacturing enterprises, they have raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. Your raw materials haven't even entered the production process yet. The components of the resulting finished good that hasn't even been started into the production process yet. For example, if you've got a metal fabrication type of enterprise, the raw metals, wood, if it's woodworking, or something like furniture. Companies, something like Treskers, their flour, sugar, and eggs would be their raw materials. Clothing manufacturers would be your buttons, your snaps, zippers, cloth. So these are the materials that are waiting to be started upon. Work in process, raw materials that have had some sort of, they've entered into the production process, but they're not finished yet. These are past what's called the intermediate phase of production. And there are various degrees of completion. I have some goods that are 90% finished, some that are 20% finished, and usually that calculation comes into being. So the level of completion of the goods and how work in process is measured at the balance sheet date usually happens at year end.
What would be considered raw material? Like, for example, would a grocery store be
They're merchandising. They're buying and selling goods. Raw materials. Oh, sorry.
Like, what about a restaurant? It's packaged food. What would that be considered?
Honestly, that would be considered more of a merchandising too. It's something like Caterpillar, or overused Caterpillar, but receiving just steel.
Is it like part of the process?
Work in process is another level of inventory. Your raw materials that are just materials, it's like that.
Manufacturing.
Yeah, you think of manufacturing or like a bakery, or they make their own product. So a restaurant does kind of, but that process happens so quickly. They don't separate into the three categories. These are more of like a mass production kind of.
Yeah, like I was more going for like for inventory, like what would it be called, I guess, if like marketing of inventory for a restaurant?
You would just call it.
Those goods.
You would just call it merchandise inventory,
Okay, so
Mhm.
okay. Gotcha.
or just inventory if you want to drop the merchandise part of it. Okay, so your finished goods, either for those entities that just buy and sell goods. This would be their one class of inventory, but would be for a different name. For a manufacturing enterprise, finished goods inventory, they've totally completed the production stages. They're available for sale to the customers. Excuse me. So, yeah, they say, why is it important? It may not be a small, excuse me. Inventory in larger companies. I've got an example there from, I think it's Procter and Gamble. I looked up some financial information off of year-end financials. And generally on the balance sheet, inventory is not a very big number. But income statement in your cost of goods sold is usually about one of the biggest, if not the biggest, expenses on a company's income statement. So maybe not a huge number on the balance sheet, but cost of goods sold is where inventory ends up when it's sold as an expense. And generally, about the biggest, yeah, it was Procter and Gamble. See, I did that like a week and a half ago. So. And this is taken right out of the financial statements of Procter and Gamble as of 6/30/20 and 6/30/19. Numbers are in millions, of course. So they're one that has Procter and Gamble produces goods. They have raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. Well, selling things like all of our cleaners and little alcohol wipes and stuff like that. So as far as how much inventory is as a percentage of total assets, it's not that much. So if you added up the three percentages, it'd be somewhere in the neighborhood of 4.5% for 2020. And about the same for 2019, a little bit less. So not even 5% of assets are inventory. Flip to the income statement and you got a total other, completely different story. Over half of the expenses in 2019 was comprised of cost of goods sold, and not quite half in 2020. So inventory, whether it's still on the shelves or whether it's been sold, has a pretty significant impact on the income statement. And you have smaller companies, generally they have a bigger number for inventory in terms of their total assets. Because places like Procter and Gamble they can invest the technology, afford the technology that some of the little guys can't, in order to do things like economic order quantity and somewhat of a just-in-time inventory system. No one can get it down to exact, of course, but can get pretty close usually. Make sure we didn't have anyone else waiting to come into the lecture there. So, what's the optimum level of inventory? What's the right amount? You want it to be high enough to meet the demand of the customers, but low enough to avoid things like outdated product. Huge in something like a supermarket, where you see the discount bin happening or goods having to be thrown out. Or you don't want to have so much goods inventory that you have to have a ton of warehouses just to be able to store it. So coming up with that balance is key. And some of the things, some of the tools that are mentioned in this chapter can help to do that. So also that question, answer, depends on who you ask. What's the right level of inventory? Marketing wants to see as much as possible, just in case there's increases in demand. They want them to be met in order to keep customers happy. Finance says, no, our money's spent in better places by keeping our inventory at a minimum and using our money elsewhere. So finance department's going to want to keep that inventory as low as possible. Marketing's going to want to see it high. Manufacturing's going to say, hey, keep our raw materials and all that available for us because we don't want any pauses in our production process. And purchasing is going to want to buy raw materials in as big a quantities as I can because they're cheaper per unit. So it all depends on who you ask. Then another one that's mentioned at the top of 244 is inventory management and control. You know, that department, they're also going to want to keep levels low in order to keep security at its most effective. Lower amounts of inventory, you have less chances of theft, of things like spoilage, things like obsolescence, and all that. So a few different tools that are mentioned in the book here. We have sections 1 and 2 respectively. Or when we talk about ABC analysis, section 2 is among us about economic over quantity. And there's also a little discussion on reorder point. That was in 12.3. A little bit, yeah. 12.3 talked about reorder point. And then 12.4 talks about the pipe dream, and that is just-in-time inventory systems. Nobody can get it down to a perfect science. When you're taking raw materials off of a delivery truck, put them right into process on the assembly line, and then rolling those finished goods out right when they're ready to be sold to customers. That's not going to happen. So the ideal is no inventory whatsoever. And that's something that you can kind of see here on Procter and Gamble. Their inventory is very low for that reason. Don't have to store as much, don't have to have as much security over it, don't have to worry about obsolete goods, spoiled goods, things like that. Okay, so the rest of 12.1 here talks about what's called the ABC analysis, which is just a classification system. And basically your goods are separated. If you look at the top of 245, you see this table here. And you separate it out by how much control is needed to be exercised over those goods. And basically the goods that need the most policing in terms of security and warehousing, you want those to be the lowest percentage in terms of units of your total inventory. But quite often, they constitute a higher cost per unit. So this could be something like a car lot. Excuse me. Might have 100 cars on the lot. In terms of number of units, aren't that much compared to the rest of total units of inventory. But in terms of the total cost of that total cost of it inventory, it's going to be high. So the less units that you have to police, the better. But the car lot, you want to make sure your keys are secured. Okay. There's a small auto reseller, one of the little towns around me. Didn't have the keys locked up, and somebody broke in and stole the keys. So we can go take all the cars whenever they want. So your category A is going to be the goods over which you have to have the highest control. They need the most attention. The records need to be the most accurate. They're almost like, remember back to, financial accounting. We talked about specific identification, inventory method. That's where you know lot number 1267 cost, $3,421 to obtain. That's the kind of detail you need on this category A investment inventory items. So they need the tightest control. They need the most detail and the most accurate records. Category B, not so higher in number, but lower in cost per unit. And for an auto dealership, maybe this is things like parts. Some of the more expensive car parts, like your alternators, it costs quite a bit to just obtain. You don't need quite as detailed of cost records, and you don't have to police them quite as much as the autos themselves. But you still want to maintain some pretty good security on those. But nothing that's going to go above and beyond typical. Category C, your lightest control. Those items which are plentiful in cost and low in cost and plentiful in quantity. When I was thinking of car dealerships, I think of those little plastic keychains they give you with a purchase of a car. Very cheap. They probably got thousands of them around and probably give them out to just about anyone who asks. So those items don't really need a lot of control over those. And in terms of the total inventory per unit, cost per unit is extremely low, and the number of units is is very high. Excuse me. So there's a sample distribution of what might be typical for a given company in terms of their A, B, and C assets. So good for the company management to know so that they know how to properly secure those assets. What items do we want under total lock and key? What ones do we want? Oh. Items do we want under lock and key? What ones don't we? Oops. Not so much.
What was the example?
Huh? Okay. And also talking here, what the whole idea is that somewhat gave birth to this ABC categorization. Something called the Pareto principle. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's Pareto or Pareto. But it was a mid 19th century, the late 19th century to early 20th century economist. Something called the 80-20 rule. Just a little history. It says that 80% of the consequences come from 20% of the causes. And so that says that there's 80% of the profits due to 20% of the investment. So similar to your category ABC, the category A assets being close to 20% of the total inventory in terms of units and close to 80% of the total cost. So that's what it's based off of. It's not exact. So what is a little more scientific, so to speak, a little more nerdy, is the economic order quantity, or the determination of EOQ. Basically tells us what is our optimum order quantity. And there's several constraints that are involved. But the cost per item, when you're calculating economic order quantity, that's assumed to be a constant. We'll introduce a little bit farther into the discussion a little discussion about quantity discounts, where you do have a difference in cost per item. And when that's the case, EOQ is something you can calculate, but it doesn't have as much meaning. You usually calculate EOQ for each price level and measure that against the economic order quantity of the goods without the discount. Okay, so there's a couple of different formulas involved in coming up with economic order quantity. And they're both on about the first half of 246. There's what's called annual ordering cost and annual carrying cost. And then the total annual cost of inventory is the sum of the two. So some of the components of the annual ordering cost formula. What that measures is the number of orders that are placed in a year multiplied by the total cost of placing an order. So on top of the item cost, there is on top of the carrying cost, there is the actual order of how much do the goods cost before even factoring on how much does it cost for us to keep those items in inventory. So the components, there's a big D and a little d, we'll see. So our capital D is annual demand of an item. We'll see in the production run module, we'll see a lowercase d, and that actually stands for daily demand. So the Q is the amount of the inventory order, what's the quantity of items being ordered. And then there's the C sub O, which is the cost of placing an order. I think in the PowerPoints I use zeros instead of O's. It looked like a zero to me. I think it is actually zero. So that's the cost of placing an order. On top of just the per unit cost. So the actual formula to calculate annual ordering costs is the total annual demand divided by the quantity of goods per unit, quantity of goods per order times the cost of placing an order. So D over Q would be how many times a year you order. And we'll run through an example here that starts at the bottom of 247. It makes a little more sense when you get numbers put into it. So there's also the annual carrying cost, which there's a 2 involved. If you look at the formula, it's Q over 2 times the cost component. And the dividing by 2 is coming up with average annual inventory order quantity times the cost of placing an order. Actually, nope, that's C sub C. I made a mistake. That's the carrying cost per unit. Oops. I think I'd copied and pasted that slide, and that's where I messed up. So C sub C should be carrying cost per unit. I'll fix that on the PowerPoint and re-upload it. So the carrying cost formula is going to be the average inventory level times the carrying cost per unit. So if you added those two formulas together, you'd get the annual total cost of inventory. What we want is to minimize that cost. And if we set those equal, which is the ideal, and solve for Q, that's how we come up. The Q in this case will be economic order quantity. And that's the optimum number of times to order inventory in a year. And so I put this slide out of order. Inventory levels they vary about pretty wildly like this. So we use the average inventory level in this carrying cost formula. That slide's just one out of order. And if you looked at the actual total, you plotted the total carrying cost, since that's a per unit, a fixed cost per unit, that would graph as a straight line. Ordering costs, basically the more you order, the less it costs per unit. The lower number of goods you order, the more it is per unit. So that's somewhat of a asymptotical relationship. X-axis there. The intersection of ordering cost and carrying cost, where those are equal, would be your economic order quantity. That's what we're trying to find out here. And then our total cost of inventory would basically be adding the carrying cost and the ordering cost together. And that would give us our total minimum cost that our units could cost us per unit per year. So the economic order quantity formula has a square root involved. With the square root of 2 times the annual demand times the cost of placing an order divided by the cost of the carrying cost per unit of goods. So example makes this make a lot more sense. And that example starts on the bottom of 247, continues through 248, and goes to about the top of 249. Actually goes to about the middle of 249. I'll show you a different way of coming up with the same number as well. So in this one, we've got inputs of, we got an appliance company that needs to secure some motors for refrigerators. Oh, this would be a company like Whirlpool or Maytag that makes their own appliances. I don't want to have too many motors on hand because there can be obsolescence in those motors. You keep too many, and time progresses, they become more powerful. You got a bunch of old obsolete motors just because they were cheap. So we want to keep as few as possible while still meeting demand. So this company pulled from its inventory records that it sold 1,296 units last year. Excuse me. And cost the company $50 in ordering costs every time it orders. So you don't want to have to place too many orders, or that $50 is gonna really add up. And plus the penalty, so to speak, of having units in inventory is that it's about $4 to store them and to prepare those for assembly. Excuse me. So you don't have too many units, or it's going to cost you more. So the optimum number of motors to order each time is derived from that economic order quantity formula. So the 2 is a constant. It's the square root of 2 times the demand, which is at 1,296 units sold, times the ordering costs. $50 per order, divided by the carrying cost per unit. So over 4, do the multiplication. It actually comes out very nice and neat. It comes up to 180 motors per order. That's like the optimum. So the company should order, and you could figure out how many motors or how many times you're going to order per year by taking your total demand and dividing it by 180. That tells you about, well, not quite 10. Even. And I got 1296 over 180. A little over 7 times a year. So not quite every 2 months. Every month and a half or so. And ordering inventory every month and 3/4. Be ordering 180 motors each time. And hopefully that amount can actually be obtained for maybe a more decent price than if you ordered, 30 motors each time. And then we'll talk about the EOQ for quantity discount in a second. So if we use that economic order quantity, you can verify that, yes, this is the minimum by just plugging in a number above and a number below in terms of per units. Excuse me. So your total cost of inventory is going to be that ordering cost times the carrying cost, or plus the carrying cost. And the book picked 2 values for Q, one that was above the EOQ and one that was below the EOQ, and seeing what the total cost comes up with. So first I need to come up with the total cost of inventory based off of an economic order quantity of 180. And that formula is up here. That's the addition of your annual ordering cost plus your annual carrying cost formulas. Annual ordering cost being the first half, annual carrying cost being the second half. So those weirdly, the ordering cost, the carrying cost were both $360. Evenly between ordering and carrying costs, that's not always the case. Just the way this example turned out. So any other quantity besides 180 units should yield a higher total cost of inventory, even if it's above 180 or below 180. So the book's example decided, hey, we're going to take a couple of values for quantity. We're going to use 160 for a quantity below economic order quantity. And we'll use 200 for a number above economic order quantity. Run those through the same total cost formula. 720 is what we're looking for. That's the Q total inventory cost. Excuse me. And running 160 through the calculation of total cost. End up with a total cost of inventory at 725. Running quantity 200 through a calculation. That's the total cost of 724, both higher than EOQ. Doesn't look like much. But these could be in hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions. So it could be a pretty significant financial savings to use economic order quantity in terms of coming up with how many times a year you place your orders. Excuse me. So then they give us the wrinkle at the bottom of 248, top of 249. What if we're not given the carrying cost per unit? Maybe instead we're given the total carrying cost for all inventory and an inventory average value. So I threw a couple different variables at us. So we can use those variables to determine what that carrying cost is. I've got P as the purchase price per unit. So C sub AC is annual carrying cost for all inventory divided by the average inventory value. That much times the purchase price of the item. Derive the carrying cost per unit. I would not be that evil and ask to do that. Because boy, that really makes the economic order quantity formula look kind of disgusting. Instead of putting in average carrying costs, you have to put the whole prior formula. Yeah. That looks a little gross, but it comes out to the same exact amount. Ran through the whole shebang. This time we were given the purchase price per unit that we weren't given before, the total inventory value, and the carrying cost for all inventory. That was the same carrying cost that we derived earlier. So what? So determining economic order quantity given a couple of different variables. We land at the same 180 units that we did before. Excuse me. So now they give us the discount wrinkle. This is where our project comes into play. Basically, what's done here in the EOQ for quantity discount, this is what the assignment for next week is based off of. You only have to calculate economic order quantity one time, which is nice. And then it's all about setting the order size high enough so that you can take advantage of discounts, purchase discounts. I see this ordering office supplies all the time. And this is where you do have to do a bit of a, well, a little bit of a decision-making thought in your head. If I order this additional quantity, is the cost savings going to be worth it to me? And that is what we do in on 252. There's this 11 column table. And that's basically where the results are entered into for this EOQ problem. And that tells us what's the change in our total cost per unit if we order a higher quantity at a lower amount per unit, as opposed to the optimal ordering level, which is the EOQ. Okay. So the example we're given, the book, uses that $200 per unit we paid for goods. But we're given the opportunity of getting discounts if we order higher quantities. So is it worth it? Is the question of the day. So the first thing we do is determine economic order quantity, which of course was done before, but we ran through that calculation again. So our EOQ at, what was it, 200 units or $200 per unit was 180 units. That 180 units is well under the quantity that qualifies for discounts. So we do want to look at EOQ based off of 195 per unit and 193 per unit for the price. And we want to use the minimum quantity it takes us to get there. So for our cost of 195 per unit, we're looking at 501 for an order quantity. 193 per unit, 1,001 per unit. So we'll run through that calculation a couple more times. Excuse me. Each one giving us an EOQ less than those amount of the ordering quantity that could get us that discount. Excuse me. So it could still be a better deal. So what we need to calculate is our total cost. Total cost of ordering at the economic order quantity for $200 per unit. Total cost of ordering 195 units, or 501 units at 195 apiece. And the total cost of ordering 1,001 units at 193. You don't have to order as often, so you're not incurring this additional ordering cost as many times. But on the other side, there might be additional costs of storing those goods, cost of them being in inventory. Excuse me. So I ran through that calculation 3 times. That would be the total our annual ordering cost plus our annual carrying cost plus the actual demand, annual demand times the unit price of goods. That's what DP is. The cost of ordering the goods, the ordering cost, and the carrying cost all summed together. And actually, I'm going to go out to my Google Drive. The project. Good deal. I think I put this up here. Got it. So the lowest total cost of inventory, surprisingly, occurs if we order 1,001 units at a time. And mentioned in the bullet point, yeah, based on total cost, this is ideal. But there might be some non-numerical factors that are involved that might make that not a good idea. Things such as, the goods being obsolete. Those motors, they could get outdated. Talking motors for appliances. Well, especially if you're dealing with things like computers. They get outdated real quick. You're gonna have to possibly build additional warehouses to store these items, which need personnel assigned to them, additional costs there. Would need security systems, additional costs there. Having a lot of inventory sitting around could be an invitation to have theft occur. Well, a lot of things for management to consider. We're looking at just the pure dollar amounts. And I reproduced the table here. It's kind of small on the screen, but this is the same table that was on here in page 252. And what we studied here, actually, I think I do have that file out on, I have that out on my cloud drive, my OneDrive, so I think that's it right there. There it is. Okay, I'll post this up too. Actually, no, that kind of gives away the problem. So economic order quantity was calculated one time right here. That was ordering 0 to 500 units. Coming up with order quantity was happened through the square root formula. Was the square root of the 2 times the demand times the ordering cost, that entire quantity divided by the carrying cost per unit, square root of that entire argument. So that was coming up with our order size. That ordering size of 180 gives us a cost of just the unit cost of purchase of our demand, our total demand per year, times the price per unit. That's how we get our total cost of purchase, our total ordering cost. This problem was actually given to us. We have to come up with it in the next 2 quantities. The total carrying cost was also given to us, and we need to derive that in the next 2 quantities as well. So total cost of inventory is going to be cost of purchase plus the ordering cost times carrying cost. So that first line will basically be your benchmark. So none of the changes are going to be calculated against that first line. So for our economic order quantity, we're not going to calculate a change in total cost as a dollar amount or a percentage, or change in order size as a unit number or percentage. This is the top line is our benchmark. The other quantities will be compared to that one. Let me make this a little bigger. There we go. So what happens if we order 501 units? Our price per unit actually goes down to $195. So we'll see a drop in the total cost of purchasing goods, total cost in our obtaining our inventory. Our ordering cost will decrease too, but our carrying cost is going to increase. Total ordering cost is calculated as, again, our total demand in units divided by the order size times the ordering cost per order. So the number of times we order per year times 50. So we're ordering a little more than one time per year. Well, actually, a little more than 2 times per year, excuse me. Bottom one. So cost of ordering is going to be less. We're ordering in a higher quantity, of course. We're ordering a fewer number of times per year. But we got a lot more goods that are just sitting in inventory. So our carrying cost is calculated and using our carrying cost formula as our carrying cost per unit times the average inventory. So $4 per unit times the average order size, excuse me, not average inventory. Average order size. Sweating under here. So carrying cost is more when we order more units because we're not using them as quickly. So we have to have a little more space for our goods, a little more cost maintained or necessary in maintaining storage of those goods. Maybe additional warehouses, additional personnel, tighter security measures. Might have to rent space in terms of warehouses. We didn't have to before. So then we calculate our total cost, being our cost of purchase, plus our cost of ordering, plus our carrying cost. So the sum of those three items gives us a dollar amount that's a little bit less than what it was using economic order quantity. So we got goods sitting around, but they're actually a little bit cheaper. That's where you need to make the decision, is it worth it or is it not? So our next columns that we didn't deal with before, what's the change in our total cost? Well, that's calculated as taking the difference between what's the cost at 195 per unit versus what was the total cost of economic order quantity. Always use economic order quantity here. Excuse me, for the benchmark. So our change in total cost as a whole dollar amount, $6,069 less. To order 501 goods, 501 units of goods, as opposed to 180. When we get a lower price per unit. In terms of percentages, kind of a percentage that we're looking at. And that would be the change in the total cost divided by the total cost of securing our economic order quantity. Excuse me. So change in order size isn't too bad of a calculation. It's just order size under the new scenario versus order size under economic order quantity. Oops. I think I might just screw something up. So we're ordering 321 more units of goods. And how big of a percentage change is that? That'd be the difference. Times our percent change in total order size. Yeah, that should be a different number. There's a difference between the two figures of 180 minus 501. Divide that by 501 units. Multiply by 100. That's the one that doesn't make as much sense to me. I think the total change in order size should be bigger than that. But that's the way the textbook did it. Excuse me. Okay, so in our final, since we're only given 3 scenarios in terms of cost per unit, our last item is, what if we order 1,001 units and above? And we can get those goods for $193 per unit. Cheapest price, highest quantity. Right off the bat, that's going to be associated with the highest carrying cost. And you have the lowest ordering cost. You won't be ordering as many times per year, but you're going to have a lot more goods sitting in inventory. So is it worth it? So we assume our order size as being the minimum quantity that it takes to get the goods for the discounted price, 1,001 units times $193 per unit gives us our cost of purchase, our ordering cost, and is our annual demand divided by order size times ordering cost per order. We're ordering just a little over 1 time per year at 1,001 units. So total ordering cost $65. Total carrying costs, however, are going to be the highest of the 3 scenarios we looked at. So total carrying costs, our carrying cost per unit times our average order size. So $4 times our 1,001 divided by 2 gives us our average carrying cost of $2,002. Highest of the 3 because we have more goods, more units. So total cost, we add the 3 together. The cost of purchase, the ordering cost, the carrying cost. Just a little bit less than is ordering 501 units. Not a huge amount to write home about. As compared to the economic order quantity, though, the difference is $7,700. And that's a percentage change in total cost. the difference between a change in total cost divided by the total cost of our economic order quantity, total cost, expressed as a percentage. So each one has a decrease, so there is a minus sign in front of there. Not so easy to see, but these are figures with which you'd go into the meeting armed with. We can order 1,001 units, and the change in our total cost is going to be a reduction of 3%. However, our carrying cost is going to increase substantially compared to economic order quantities. So we're changing order size, 1,001 units versus 180, the difference of 821 units. And a total change in order size of over 4%. So a little bit, kind of using the is it worth it argument. And I did put on our Sakai site, my tabs get kind of jumbled. I did put a template up there that's got the just has the bare bones and it shows the calculations, but basically the Excel version of what I printed in the instructions for the economic order quantity problem. I just printed that. So if you wanted to do that in Excel, here's an Excel worksheet devoid of formulas. Another good one to use some absolute cell references in if you do decide to use Excel. Oh, excuse me. So that is available. And this again is exactly the same as is 252 in the book. Okay. Usually we'll do a little break time here, so I just will do that. We'll do maybe like 15-minute break or so, and then we'll jump into economic order quantity for manufacturing businesses, and then then we cover reorder point and just in time. We'll do like 15 minutes here. It's hotter here than what I thought. I don't think you guys ever had class up in Baker before it got torn down. Did you? Did you ever have class up on the 4th floor of Baker? Talk about being hot.
I always remember it was never the heating coolers would never work, right?
It's almost like if you have a class up at one of the top floors of Bradley. Baking. I didn't know how long it'd been. Yeah, it was 3 years ago when that Baker was out of commission. It was 2017, last time it was used. If you had class down in the basement, you were usually freezing. Fourth floor was where all the accounting classes were. It was usually hotter than blue blazes. Warm air rises. I can only imagine this building what it's like up on the top floor.
I remember the elevator, we always get stuck.
Yeah, oh, I never took the elevator in Baker for that reason. I am highly claustrophobic and afraid of getting stuck in an elevator. That is like my biggest fear. And I saw that thing get stuck one too many times. I'm like, nope, 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 nope. I would run up the stairs. Surprisingly, I will take the elevator here because I'm carrying about a 20-pound bag. Didn't stop me at Baker though. The backpack could weigh that much, but I weighed a lot less back in those days. A lot less. Time will do that to you. To my age, you got to remember what age you are. Just added another one. This thing is bugging me tonight. Oops. Let's go back into it or get us through. Why not? Excuse me. Well, the company produces their own goods. Determining economic order quantity gets a little more sticky. A few more inputs get introduced to the formula. And economic order quantity is actually renamed optimal input production, OIP. Ordering cost is replaced by setup cost. And what's involved in setup cost? Cost of designing and setting up the equipment. Payroll for operators. Direct labor, all that from sounding terms. And things like administrative costs, all which would be kind of indirect labor, so to speak. So, and then also difference between production versus ordering goods. For production, you have to build up your inventory. That inventory gets built up as input gets produced. Some other items we need to know are our demand, our average daily demand, which we could just get our demand divided by, how many days we produce. Daily production rate. And the number of days of production. What days are our processes closed? Are we producing units on the weekends? Are we on there on holidays? Problem given by the book. They're very generous with their number of days produced. They only produce 200 days per year, not even 4 days a week. Okay. So determining annual setup cost is the capital D. We'll see the capital D versus the lowercase d. Capital D is annual demand divided by our quantity times the C sub S is setup cost. So that setup cost be per unit. So we do the multiplication, we would come up with annual setup cost. How do we get carrying cost? We start with the maximum level of inventory during the production cycle. And it's daily production times the production period minus the daily demand times the production period. And then just like we divided by 2 to get average inventory costs, get the average inventory divided by maximum level divided by 2, give us average inventory, and our annual carrying cost. Just kind of showing this for comparison. We won't be hitting on this exam-wise by any means. It gets a little too involved. It's kind of an ugly formula. Back off from that. So there's just additional factors that are being taken into consideration. When you have production of goods, you have to know those daily amounts, the daily number of units produced, the daily demand, and what we want to optimize is actually input production. And I'll show a quick example of it. It wasn't as horrible as it looks, but it's kind of more involved. So our annual demand for product is 9,000 units. Every time we run a production, it costs us $95 to set up the equipment on average. Carrying cost per unit, once we get those in inventory, is $5 per unit. Production per day, we can pump out 60 units and we run operations 200 days a year. So with that, what is our optimal input production? We plug those figures into the formula to the left. So 2 times the annual demand times the setup cost divided by carrying cost per unit of inventory times 1 minus 45 was, okay, I'm lost here. 45 is actually our daily demand. That's daily demand is calculated as 9,000 units divided by 200 days of production. That's where our 45 comes from. And 60 is our U, which is the daily production. We run through top and bottom calculation at a square root of 1.368 million, which gives us optimal input OIP of 1,170 motors. So it takes about 20 days for each production run. And we would do about 8 runs per year. That's basically the difference between EOQ for purchased goods versus manufactured goods. Just need a few additional pieces of information. Little easier, this one. For section 12.3, which is reorder point. How low does our inventory get before we order it again? So we need to know daily demand, lead time, how long is it going to take once we place the order to get the goods? And SS being safety stock. How many additional units do we want? Just in case we have a little uptick in demand, SS can be 0 if you want to gamble. Never hurts to order a little bit more than total demand, just in case. I'm sure stores were probably wishing they'd ordered more when it came to getting things like toilet paper and paper towels and Clorox and Clorox wipes and all that kind of stuff. Playing catch up nowadays. Actually bought my first canister of actual Clorox wipes the other day that I'd seen in like 4 months, 5 months. Had to buy them just out of posterity. Holy cow, actual Clorox wipes. Yeah, I'll take it. It was small and it was just one of them. I'm like, it's fine, yes. They're actual real Clorox wipes and not these little generic brands, but they're all the same. I don't know why I got so giddy about it. I think it was just nostalgia. Yeah, so example of reorder points. I have a company that has daily demand. That's 75 units of product. Takes 5 days to get an order. And we want to have a cushion of 105 units in our inventory. So what's our reorder point in the formula? Daily demand times lead time plus safety stock. This would be if we're reordering this quickly, like every time, you know, trying to keep our inventory at a minimum. Excuse me. So it'd be 75 units per day of demand times the 5 days of lead time. So we need to have at least 375 units inventory before we place an order. That's the bare bones. Otherwise, you're going to run out before your stock gets here. Plus our cushion, safety stock, 105 units. With that being the case, once our units get down to 480, we'll be placing an order. In inventory systems, thank goodness for barcode scanners nowadays, because that has automated so much of this, it's not even funny. Inventory systems can basically police your units for you. And give you a report that says, hey, units are under 480, it's time to place an order. Some inventory systems will not only identify it, but place the order. And it's all because of barcode scanners that have made everything basically a perpetual inventory system. So we know within reason about how many units we have in inventory of any given good. And all the cost is of that. Computers have helped us once again. Okay. So this is just analyzing that example. That once we get down to 480 units of a particular item, 480 boxes of Kleenex. Get down to that. Yeah, we want to order some more. And different items will have different reorder points. Something like a big ticket item, your daily demand isn't going to be that much. So your reorder point would be lower. For things like big ticket items or those goods that just are not in demand as much. It'd be seasonal. You know, charcoal briquettes don't sell as well in December as they do in June. The reorder point might be a lot higher in the summer months than it is in the winter. There are still people who grill in the winter. My brother is one of them. It can be 5 degrees outside, he's firing up the grill. Okay, so that gets us to just in time. And they go through a whole statistics-based approach on 258, 259, 260. That's overkill. Way more into the calculation than we need to. The formula we were given before explains it just fine. Okay, so 12.4, the just-in-time inventory system. Not a whole lot of material on that. It's kind of a pipe dream, really. The Japanese actually have been the ones who popularized just in time, and they call it the Kanban system. Used a lot in assembly lines. And the ideal inventory comes off the line, goes out for shipment. Doesn't ever sit in inventory. Another ideal is that raw materials come off the truck, come right onto the assembly line, start production off. Finished goods roll off right into a delivery truck for going to the stores. So now the inventory company has to warehouse is minimal. And why we want to keep that inventory minimum, less costs involved. Less costs, less security concerns, less insurance for one. You don't have to insure those goods. You don't have to maybe have as many personnel that actually polices them. And also, if they're not sitting around, they can't get damaged. They can't go obsolete. Oh, there should be a T in shipment. Another thing I need to fix. So what a just-in-time system needs, thing needs to be refined and almost made like a science in order for it to run properly. And you need commitment from everybody. So the design of the system, coordination between departments, between personnel, requires communication between everybody in order for a just-in-time inventory system to actually function right. So your benefits, if you have a JIT system, the costs are lower. There's an efficiency that you don't have a just-in-time system. And you don't need to determine economic order quantity or reorder points. Everything just keeps chugging along. Pitfalls are, it's easy to fail at this thing. If it fails, it can be a catastrophic failure. Just in time doesn't make any adjustments for upticks in demand. So something like our alcohol wipes. We were just pumping out enough inventory to meet current demand. We're not ready if something catastrophic happens, COVID-19, where our demand might skyrocket. And we have to totally redo our system. If you're out of inventory, that's not good on customer satisfaction at all. If you're out of inventory, you risk losing customers. So that's a big pitfall. You got to be really confident in your just-in-time system for this thing to work. Otherwise, it's a big risk having one of these. Okay, this is to the end of our material. We've got the project here that involves calculations of economic order quantity. That's the, should be the handout right after the PowerPoints. And looks about like this here. It's a perfect thing to follow. This textbook 247 to 252. Basically, we do the same calculations using different figures. So we just need to complete the table that's on the second page of that handout, or the same as that template that's available in Excel, identical. So using the economic order quantity and the number of units to receive the minimum quantity discounts in this summary of results table. Basically, we want to fill it in. So we want to, whoops, what did I just do? That was smart. Okay, there we go. So we have these items here. The price per unit, order size. Order size is going to have to be calculated for under 800 units. That's going to be our economic order quantity. Actually, that'd be order size. Yes. Price per unit. Basically, those are given to you. $78 and $75 per unit. Total cost of purchasing the goods. Total ordering cost. Total carrying cost, and total cost. And then the changes in total cost and order size, both as numbers and as percentages. And so that is in our inputs right there. That's the top of the spreadsheet. The demand, the carrying cost per unit. Things like total inventory value. We may or may not use that. And then our quantities. So that's one item. And then there's a one-page Word doc that has the paper assignment. There we go. And that has to do with credit scores. So one to 2 pages, just like as usual. Is a little bit about what credit evaluation is, what are the 5 C's, and maybe explain a little bit of the importance of each. What's the FICO score? How is it determined? There's an additional question here, not even covered by the book. Why it's important for an entrepreneur to maintain a good to excellent credit score. Better the score, the easier you can borrow money. The text can be one source, at least one additional. And it's 1 to 2 pages, and turn it in. We use that for submission. And there are drop boxes for each, the research paper and the project. And each of those I've got as being due by the time we come here next week. So 6 o'clock next week. We've got our modified schedule, we've got PowerPoints up here. A section about the research paper and about the project, and I'll add quiz for chapter 12 by tomorrow, I would say, possibly yet tonight. And then the lecture as well, as soon as I'm done zooming that. I'll have an MP4. Depending on the size, I'll either have the MP4 or a link to YouTube. All depends on how big it is. If it's too big, I have to post it to YouTube and throw a link. And I know there are 2 exams still hanging out there. And the problem we had with question 21 was me. I was the one worried about, oh, what if other people spell this wrong? I'm the one that spelled it wrong. And I can't get into the test bank and change it when it's published. I just had to go through the submissions as it came in. And yeah, everyone spelled it right but me. That's what you call irony. I think of how many thousands and thousands of times I've spelled that word over 20, almost 30 years. And yeah, I goof it up. Boy. Okay. So they have been adjusted. All the question 21s have been. I think everybody got it right, so. Well, they're all adjusted. So, any questions on chapter 12? Okay, so where we're going for next time is chapter 7, which is back on a little bit about capital leverage and structure. We talk a little bit about debt versus equity financing. Optimum structure. Earnings before income and tax and earnings per share. Talk about leverage. Talk about risk. Also just debt versus equity and that good stuff. So we've got our 2 assignments there, the little research paper on credit scores, the project with the EOQ calculations. Should have our number-phobic presentations for next week. I think it's actually chapters 5 and 6. We'll have a chapter 12 quiz that'll have, again, 10 questions. Mixed between true, false, multiple choice. Actually, about 50-50 is what I try to keep it. That'll be Monday the 26th. That's crazy. This month's getting away from us. Getting close to Thanksgiving. Halloween is going to be very strange. Who knows what's going to go on anywhere.
I don't know if it looks, it looks like it's gonna, I don't think they're gonna do it in the United States, but since they shut everything down in Europe, another mass.
Yeah, I know our little county where I live, we've had an uptick. I'm Marshall County. We've actually had 3 deaths now. Not sure who or where. Haven't heard any of that. I think we've got like 120, 30 cases in our county. We're very small towns. We've got several nursing homes
Yeah.
in our counties, so we've got one in Henry, we have one in Lakin, there's one in Toluca. There's 3 nursing homes at least in the county, and I'm probably forgetting some. I haven't heard who passed away from it, but we have had 3 deaths. I saw that this morning. Keep getting what, 4,000? I think we had 2 record days in a row. Oh, spooky. It's on here. Strange, 2021 can get here as soon as it can. Well, that's all we got for there tonight. See you next time. So, stop recording.